Now let's see a concept called hoisting in JavaScript. Hoisting is a concept in JavaScript which refers to a process where the JavaScript interpreter appears to move some part of the declaration of some parts of the code to the top of their scope before executing the code. So we will better understand it by an example. So for example, let's see something like this. So you might think that I have declared a function, and until unless I have declared a function, I cannot use it, right? So before declaration, if I use, let's say this thing, then this would give an error, right? But that does not happen. That happens in other cases, but in this particular case, this code runs fine. So what happens actually? So let's write the same function. So let's say there is a function foo. I believe that was some addition function. Yeah. So yeah, let's make that function which takes two arguments a and b and returns its addition a plus b. And I know that I can very well do something like 5 and 10. And if I print this value, then it will be 15. That is fine. But the point is that if I move it above, then at this point of time, add is not defined. But then also, you see that it gives the correct answer. It is not giving the error something like add is not defined. You understand? So I'm trying to get an example of something like this, that let's say const xyz is equal to 10, right? And then you print xyz or whatever, use xyz in any way, xyz plus 5, whatever. So whenever you are using xyz, it should be defined before, right? If it is used before but defined later, it will give an error, right? That xyz, you cannot access it because it is not defined as of now. But you see here that is not happening, right? I have used add, but add is not defined as of now. So this feature is in JavaScript is called hoisting, and it applies to only few places, not all the places. That's why I would refer that also. So what happens actually is that this declaration of this add is basically moved to the top of the code. Okay, so this add is declared, this and any, so we say, and this we say this process as hoisting, that the declaration of this thing is hoisted to the top of the code. So you understand, you write it below, but internally you can assume that JavaScript has moved it to the top and then it is executing it, right? Now we see an example that it only happens with this function. It does not happen with arrow function. So if you try to do the same with arrow function, then you will get an error. So if you try to do the same thing with arrow function, so let's say instead of this, I write simply const add is equal to right. Now what is happening is that in this case you will see that it will give an error that it is not declared, and if you move it before, then it will run fine. So hoisting of functions is happening, but hoisting of only normal functions like with declared with function keyword, only hoisting of that happens. Hoisting of arrow functions does not happen. Okay, this is first point. Next, what we are going to see is that sometimes when we are declaring a function, when we are declaring a particular variable, then it's not that only like declaring here you can say that I have declared a variable a add, which is a which points to a function, right? So it is a variable which is a function, right? Which denotes a function. Similarly, you can very well write something like so let's say which earlier example I gave, right? So let's say a is equal to 10, and then you are printing, that is fine, that is fine. But I was not able to do something like this. You see, I was not able to do something. But you understand, there is a nuance here. If you write something like, let's say x, then you see the error is different. And if I write a, the error is different. Just pay attention. If I write something like x, then it is saying that x is not defined. Means x is not there. As simple as that, right? But if I do a, then you see what is happening. It is saying that cannot access A before instantiation, which means that somehow you know JavaScript is an interpreter, right? So it moves from top to bottom, yeah, while it's not like C++ or something like it compiles the whole thing at once, right? It is not so it moves from top to bottom, but the interpreter is able to see that somehow later it is declared, right? And that's why it is giving a different, it is not simply saying that this error which was earlier there, that it is not saying that it is not defined, it is saying that it cannot access it before instantiation, which means that it is valid if you write something like this, but it is able to see that this name variable is something later it is there. It's just that you are using it before initialization, which means that JavaScript somehow knows at the top of the scope only that in future some JavaScript variable is going to be declared, right? And that's why, so basically in that sense you can understand that there is a hoisting of let and const also. It's just that JavaScript is aware that at the top of the code only, so you can understand that something like let A is hoisted, but it is not declared. You can understand, but the something like later it is declared, that information is moved at the top, and JavaScript is aware that something, some what are the variables which are available at that scope at the top, right? So this sort of behavior and this sort of variable where this thing is happening, this state is called temporal dead zone, TDZ, right? So what happens is that from the start of the block until the declaration has completed, that whole area is called temporal dead zone. So you can understand that from the beginning till here, I can say that it is a temporal dead zone for A. Understand, from top to that place, right? So this thing applies to any scope. Right now we are just dealing in one scope, global scope, that's why I am saying something like this, but we can do the same thing, something like let's say something like this, that let A is equal to 10, and then you have a normal scope bracket, right? Just to differentiate some scope, and then you write A is equal to 20, and then let's say you do something like this, okay? Then you see that again we are getting error, yeah, right? So what is happening is that if I don't have this, then there is no error, I get A10, right? And even if I have this and I would have this after this, then also there is no issue, it is 20, right? But the issue is happening when it is before this, and before and after that, like after that n number of line of codes can be there, right? That is not an issue. But the point is that whatever A you are using in this scope, A is declared here, then in this scope, this let, you can understand that it is hoisted at the top of this scope, and JavaScript at the beginning of this scope is aware that somewhere a variable is declared, and till that place, till here, and after that also some line of code can be there, right? But from top till here we will say that it is temporal dead zone of A, right? And what happens in the temporal dead zone of A, if somebody tries to ask a variable value or something like that, then it will say that cannot access it before initialization, understand? And same here, if that is not a TDZ variable, so let's say it is normal X which is not at all defined, then it will simply say that it is not defined at that error, right? But the TDZ, temporal dead zone thing, is this thing. You can understand in a sense that this thing is also, this is called let, or and the same variable will happen, same thing will happen for const also, right? So for const also the same thing will happen. So this is called hoisting of let and const. But you understand that the whole declaration is not moved at the top. I'm not saying that the whole thing has moved to the top. Let's say I'm not saying that something like this has happened, that declaration has moved, or let's say declaration has moved to the top and the assignment, I'm not saying something like this. In fact, I have not discussed apart from let and const, something like where is there, right? So that is a older syntax, that's why I don't want to go into that, but that has these caveats, that they don't have block based scope, and if you do something like then the whole var declaration is moved to the top. But again, I will not go into that because that is not we are going to use here, and we will be always using latent const, right? So here you can understand that I am not saying that if you see, if you do something like this, then it will be a valid undefined, because I have declared it and now it is undefined. I have declared it and it is undefined, but that is not the case here. Here you can understand that I am declaring it here, but the information that later it is declared is percolated to the top. It is hoisted to the top of that scope, and from there till the value is actually declared is called temporal dead zone, and within that you cannot access it, and you will get that sort of error that at wrong place basically you are using it. You should not use it before initialization. Okay, so that is fine. One another simple thing I would like to say, this is strictly not in the concept of hoisting, but still it is somewhat related because it might be confusing. So let me give you that example. So let's say I have a simple function, let's say add num, and the example which I gave is that some num n is there and you're adding n plus a. Now what is a? What is a? A is not defined till now, right? Now let's do something like this, that let's define let a later, let a is equal to 5 later, right? And then use add num with some value 10. Do you think it will run correctly? So if we print this value, then we are seeing that it is correctly running 15. So what is happening? Is here also hoisting or something is happening, right? So yeah, so you can understand in that context, but here the issue is different. See, the function is declared at the top, but after that, before the function is called, that variable which is used is inside the function is already declared, which means that it looks like when I'm declaring here a is not there, but doesn't matter, that add num is not being called right now, so a value is not needed right now. Okay, so this thing is fine, just declaration is happening. When that add num will be called, that time we will see, that whether a is there or not. So for example, if for example a is not declared, right, and then I call, so a is not declared, and let's say I just print hello, you see, let's see, I just print hello, then you see that no error has come, even if this is not, because this is not called. So why to bother about that this a is not defined, right? But when this thing is called, then a is not defined, then we are seeing that okay, a is not defined, now it is saying, right? So either a has to be defined here, then is, or it is very well at the beginning, then it is no doubt at all. But my point was that even if it is not declared at the beginning, even if it is declared just before calling that, then also it is fine, because actually this thing will be called when here the execution is happening. When the here execution is happening, before that a is already declared, and that's why it does not matter that while you are declaring the function, before that a is there or not, that does not, the while before you're calling the function, before that all things in that should be there. And this is a concept of something called closure, which we discussed, right? That any sort of uh, data which is coming from the outer scope to the inner scope. So you can understand this is also scope, right? Here no curly bracket is there, but then also it is scope only, right? We can it is implicit written, but you can understand it like this, right? So the value from the outer scope is going to this scope, right? So this is called closure. The value from the outer scope going to the inner scope. Okay, so this thing is pretty much fine, and there are other nuances of hoisting, but I think that let and const hoisting resulting into temporal dead zone and normal function, not arrow function, normal functions hoisting is happening. So sometimes you might need to write a normal function with function keyword rather than arrow function to take the advantage of that hoisting, right, if you need. So these are the two things which are most commonly used, and that should be enough for us. Okay, that's all for now. We will start some new thing related to ES6 in the next video.